South Africa is warning that Palestine faces total destruction if the International Court of Justice doesn't intervene to halt Israel's bombardment of Gaza. Opening statements were delivered in The Hague yesterday, where Pretoria outlined its genocidal intent case against Tel Aviv. Now, Israel's assault on Gaza has killed more than 23,000 people, many of them women and children. It follows a surprise attack by Hamas back in October that killed around 1,200 people. 200 other people were taken hostage. Now, lawyers representing South Africa insist that Tel Aviv's actions go beyond the bounds of self-defense and outline several interventions, which include an end to fighting and for aid to be allowed into the enclave. Let's make sense of what happened yesterday as we chart the way forward today. Bring in international relations analyst Musa Mdunge, who joins us now live video link from Scotland. Great to have you on the program, Musa. Thanks very much indeed for making time. And what a time it was in the Peace Palace yesterday. I wonder if we can begin by just unpacking South Africa's strategy here. You heard one lawyer after the other sort of unpacking a different aspect of the singular argument that South Africa is making, almost serving this as piecemeal for those of us who are listening. And you almost got a sense that they weren't just talking to the 15 judges who were sitting there, but because of how clear and simple their language was, it almost felt like it was also a message to the world.
Good morning, Ayanda, and to your viewers. Indeed, you have really laid the foundation of this discussion very well. You know, South Africa's strategy yesterday was not only to really communicate to the judges of the International Court of Justice, but really to communicate to the other members of the United Nations, firstly and most importantly, but also to the rest of the world, to see this as what it really is, from obviously the perspective of the South African government, which is a genocide against the people of Palestine, particularly in the Gaza Strip. And so we saw, you know, particularly in terms of the strategy from South Africa, was to divide, its case between two lines here. One, dealing with the conduct of the Israeli Defense Force in Gaza since the 7th of October. But secondly, and more importantly, is the intent part of it. And that is the more difficult part. To prove the intent of genocide is a difficult case. And what we saw being done yesterday was an intentional decision to take the world and to take the court through the history before even the 7th of October, to frame the actions of Israel in a broader context of its actions against the people in Gaza, but also the people in the West Bank. For the past 70 or so years, we have seen and witnessed what has happened to the people of Palestine. And secondly, by moving into the intent, we saw the South African, legal team use quotations from key Israeli military officials and politicians in order to frame again and draw the line of intention, the intention to commit genocide. Now, unfortunately, this court does not have jurisdiction, right, to charge and convict a person of a crime such as genocide. But what they can do is at least lay before the world what kind of action Israel needs to take in order to limit the consequences of its military action,
right.
But also to invoke in other United Nations members a call to say they need to hold Israel accountable. And I think that is where South Africa's strategy is trying to draw the world towards.
And what you've just said is arguably the nub of the issue here, right? The term interim provisional measures rung through that court several times yesterday. South Africa is essentially asking as a first step that the ICJ essentially force Israel to stop before we even have a discussion about whether or not a genocide is unfolding in Gaza.
Yes, certainly. That is the key for the South African government and its position. And it is in line with its foreign policy position. Now, others may argue, well, there's an inconsistency in South Africa's application of international law. Where was this when it needed to arrest Omar al-Bashir? Where was this in relation to Russia's invasion in Ukraine and the accusations of children being kidnapped and held hostage by the Russian government? And so, while kudos to South Africa for standing up for human rights, as it has always envisioned to do in its foreign policy since 1994. But the question will be around consistency post this. And these are the questions that South Africa is going to answer, made more difficult, Ayanda, by the fact that we are going to elections. And we already know that parties like the Democratic Alliance do not support South Africa's position on the Israel-Hamas conflict. And what will be the implication if the Moonshot Pact were to enter power in terms of a realignment of South Africa's foreign policy? So as a crescendo to South Africa's foreign policy as we have seen it in the past 30 years, this is a seminal moment. But whether it will speak to a broader long-term foreign policy position by the South African government is yet to be seen, given that, Ayanda, these cases take years, in fact, to conclude. And by that time, could we have a new sheriff in court, excuse the pun, when we think about South Africa's foreign policy?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I almost got a sense while watching yesterday that the legal team representing South Africa was almost preemptive of what Israel might say later on today, right? Laying out very unequivocally that as far as they see it, and in fact, as per the stipulation in the Genocide Convention, there are no conditions for genocide. Whether self-defense, whether you feel that there is a Hamas hiding behind civilian bodies, as far as they're concerned, and this was repeated multiple times, including towards the end, which suggests that this is the final message that they want to ring in the minds of the judges, that there is, in fact, no condition under which indiscriminate bombing can take place anywhere in the world. With that in mind, how do you reckon Israel will approach today?
Well, Israel will certainly raise the issue that it is rather they who are the victims in this particular conflict, given that Hamas is the one who opened the opening salvo of this particular conflict. Secondly, of course, they will invoke their right as a sovereign state to the right of self-defense. And that is an argument that, that has quite a lot of reference that they can pull from in terms of past cases in order to justify their particular action in Gaza. But thirdly, they may look at the operational issues around this particular conflict. Given the fact that Hamas is so embedded with the community in Gaza, given the kind of infrastructure they have built as integrated with even the integration of where people live in Gaza, they will argue that it is very difficult in a conflict such as this, where one, they are trying to root out what they call the terrorists, the Hamas group, which is so embedded with society. It's a very difficult operation for them to do. But in their action, they have proven that they have not thought through, how do they protect civilians in Palestine while meeting their security obligations in order to root out Hamas. But thirdly, the issue of hostages. And this is also something that South Africa, in its strategy, can also invoke, that in actual fact, Israel's conflict in Gaza is in actual fact also a danger to its own citizens who are hostages in Gaza, because there hasn't been a due consideration really when we look at the strategy to think about where hostages could be placed. If the case is that Hamas has embedded itself among the people, has Hamas also embedded the hostages among the people and used them as a shield as well? And so Israel, can invoke an argument of self-defense, but at the same time, South Africa can, in actual fact, also invoke and say that, in actual fact, Israel is failing its own citizens using the same kind of argument. It will be interesting to see what are the counter-arguments that both sides will bring forth in this particular case. But I think top in mind for Israel is the issue of self-defense and the fact that they were the victims first. And this is why we saw South Africa's strategy not just isolate this to the 7th of October, but to give a historical context, envisioning that rebuttal from the Israeli government.
Fascinating. So many moving parts. Historic in many ways. And thanks for your analysis. Musa Mdunge, I really do appreciate your time today. Musa is an international relations analyst. Live to us there from Scotland.